Jack Carter had always wanted a simple life. After years of war and bloodshed, he finally found peace on a remote colony planet called Arvin 4. It was a quiet, forgotten world at the edge of the galaxy, far away from the chaos of the galactic empire. Jack spent his days fixing old machines and tending to his small cabin. He had no neighbors, no friends, just the silence he had longed for. But everything changed the night she arrived. It was late when Jack heard the sound. Soft, almost like a whispering breeze, but something about it made his instincts flare. He grabbed his old sidearm and opened the cabin door. What he saw froze him in place. A woman lay collapsed on his porch, her body covered in cuts and bruises. Her dark purple skin shimmered under the moonlight, and her torn clothing barely hid the deep wounds across her arms and legs. Jack knelt beside her, and when he brushed her violet hair away from her face, his breath caught. Her features were delicate and beautiful, but her eyes, when they fluttered open, were filled with sheer desperation and fear. "Please," she whispered, her voice weak. "Help me. If you don't, you'll die too." Before Jack could respond, a distant rumble echoed through the sky. He looked up and saw them, bounty hunter ships descending like vultures. The ships were sleek and black, their lights scanning the ground below. Jack didn't know who this woman was, but his soldier's instincts screamed danger. "Can you walk?" he asked her urgently. She shook her head, her breathing ragged. Jack didn't waste time. He scooped her into his arms and carried her inside, locking the door behind him. He laid her on the couch, but there was no time for questions. The ships had landed. Soldiers with advanced tech and armor spread out through the trees, their scanning devices sweeping the area. Jack grabbed his rifle and activated his old cloaking device, one of the few pieces of military gear he still kept. "Stay here. Stay quiet," he whispered to her. Jack slipped out into the night, his figure blending into the shadows. The first soldier never saw him coming. Jack's knife slid between the armor plates with surgical precision. The second went down with a muffled shot to the head. But they were too many. A warning klaxon blared as they discovered the bodies. The night erupted with gunfire. Jack moved like a ghost, taking them out one by one. His years of training kicked in as he used the terrain to his advantage, laying traps and striking from the darkness. When the last soldier fell, Jack returned to the cabin, his heart pounding. But as he opened the door, his blood ran cold. The woman was gone. He spun around, his rifle ready, and found her standing behind him, holding one of the fallen soldier's weapons. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were fierce. "Who are you?" Jack demanded. "My name is Ziara," she said, her voice steadier now. "And you've just made yourself a target. They won't stop until they have me." "Why?" Jack asked. "Because I'm the most wanted woman in the galaxy," she said, her voice heavy with fear and defiance. "And if they catch me, we're both dead." Jack's peaceful life was over. They didn't have long. Jack knew the bounty hunters would send reinforcements. He gathered supplies, weapons, and his old military gear while Ziara tried to explain. She was no ordinary fugitive. She was royalty. Princess Ziara of the Velnari Empire. And she had uncovered a secret that could destroy the galaxy's balance of power. "The Emperor is building a weapon," she said, "a machine that can wipe out entire planets. I tried to stop him, and now he wants me dead." Jack didn't know if he could trust her, but the desperation in her eyes was real. And the ships in the sky weren't waiting. They fled Arvin 4 in Jack's old ship, the Iron Fang. But the pursuit was relentless. The bounty hunters had tracking drones and ag-controlled fighters. The Iron Fang wasn't fast, but Jack knew how to fly. They weaved through asteroid fields and slipped past patrols, but every time they thought they were safe, the enemy found them again. During a rare quiet moment, Jack treated Zara's wounds. She winced but didn't complain. "Why come to me?" he asked as he bandaged her arm. "Because humans are the only ones who fight for more than power," she said softly. "I hoped you would help me." He wanted to stay detached, but the way she looked at him, with trust and hope, made that impossible. Their luck finally ran out when they were ambushed at a space station. An old friend of Jack's had offered help, but it was a trap. Ziara was dragged away by mercenaries while Jack fought like a man possessed. He took down half their numbers before they overwhelmed him. When he woke, he was in chains, and Ziara was gone. But Jack Carter didn't quit. Using a hidden blade, he broke free and fought his way through the station. The final showdown was brutal. Bloodied and battered, Jack faced the mercenary captain, a towering cyborg with laser weapons built into his arms. The fight was fierce and desperate, but Jack's human ingenuity and sheer stubbornness won out. He found Ziara in the docking bay, surrounded by enemies. But before they could harm her, Jack unleashed hell. Grenades, gunfire, and pure rage tore through the mercenaries. By the time it was over, the station was burning, and Jack carried Ziara onto their ship. "You came back," she whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Always," he said, and for the first time she smiled. But their fight wasn't over. The Emperor's flagship, a massive dreadnought, was closing in. Ziara knew they had only one chance. They had to reach a broadcast station and send the Emperor's secrets to the entire galaxy. If they failed, the rebellion would die before it began. The final battle was chaos. Enemy ships swarmed them as they fought their way to the station. Jack piloted like a madman, dodging lasers and missiles, while Ziara hacked the communications array. But the Emperor's enforcer was waiting. A monstrous cyborg, faster and stronger than any enemy they'd faced before. The fight was brutal and desperate. Jack's weapons barely made a dent, and the cyborg's strikes left him broken and bleeding. But when the cyborg turned on Ziara, Jack found strength he didn't know he had. With a final, desperate attack, he brought the monster down. But the cost was high. Jack collapsed, his vision going dark. "You have to finish this," he whispered. Ziara's hands shook as she activated the broadcast. The Emperor's crimes flashed across every screen in the galaxy. The rebellion had its spark. But when she turned back to Jack, his breathing was shallow. Tears filled her eyes as she cradled his head in her lap. "Stay with me," she begged. "Please." But his eyes closed, and the world went silent. Weeks later, the galaxy was on fire. The Emperor's empire was crumbling. Ziara led the rebellion with a fierce determination, but her heart was broken. Every victory felt hollow without the man who had saved her, who had believed in her when no one else did. And every night, she looked to the stars, hoping that somewhere, somehow, Jack Carter would find his way back to her. Jack Carter pushed the Iron Fang's thrusters to their limit, the ship vibrating violently as it shot through Arvin 4's upper atmosphere. Behind them, the sky was ablaze with streaks of light. Pursuing ships, fast and heavily armed. Warnings flashed across the cockpit's display. Heat-seeking missiles locked on, closing the distance. "Hold on," Jack shouted. The ship spun into a sharp dive, pulling dangerously close to the rocky terrain below. The missiles followed, their targeting systems relentless. Jack's hands moved with practiced precision, flipping switches and adjusting thruster output. With a sudden jerk, the Iron Fang rolled hard to the right, cutting between narrow canyon walls. Two of the missiles didn't make the turn, slamming into the cliffs in a fiery explosion. In the co-pilot's seat, Ziara gripped the harness with white-knuckled hands, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. Sweat clung to her violet skin, her golden eyes flickering with fear. "They're not going to stop," she said, her voice trembling. "They'll chase us across the galaxy." Jack's jaw tightened. Let him try. Another missile warning blared. Jack grinned grimly. Time for a trick. He killed the thrusters, and the ship dropped like a stone. The last missile shot past them, its momentum carrying it far ahead. At the last second, Jack fired the engines again and pulled up hard. The missile looped back, but before it could correct its course, it crashed headlong into the lead bounty hunter ship. The explosion lit up the night sky. That's one problem solved, Jack muttered. But even as he said it, more ships appeared on the scanner, dozens of them. The bounty hunters weren't giving up. Jack, Zyara's voice rose in panic. We won't survive this. He didn't argue. They needed an escape, and fast. There's an old spaceport 2 clicks north, he said. If we can reach it, we'll find a way off this rock. But the bounty hunters had other plans. The comms crackled to life. A cold, mechanical voice filled the cabin. Surrender the Velnari fugitive, human, and your death will be quick. Jack's lips curled into a snarl. Come and get her. The spaceport was in ruins, abandoned for years. Jack brought the iron fang down hard, dust and debris swirling around them. Move, he barked, unstrapping his harness and grabbing his rifle. Zyara followed, limping but determined. They sprinted across the cracked tarmac toward a rusting freighter. Jack's cloaking device flickered as they moved, hiding them from the scanning drones overhead. Behind them, bounty hunter ships landed, troops pouring out. Jack reached the freighter's access panel and started hacking. Come on, come on. Zyara kept watch, her eyes darting across the shadows. They're coming, she hissed. The panel blinked green. The freighter's doors hissed open. Inside, Jack ordered. Zyara climbed in, and Jack followed, sealing the hatch just as blaster fire peppered the hull. Jack ran to the cockpit, fingers flying over unfamiliar controls. I hope you like rough rides. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. The ship lifted off unevenly, scraping against the port's skeletal remains. Outside, the bounty hunters opened fire. Explosions rocked the freighter. We're not going to make it, Zyara cried. Yes, we are. Jack punched the throttle. The ship shot skyward, breaking through the atmosphere with a burst of speed. Behind them, the bounty hunters followed. But Jack had one last trick. He flipped a switch, and the ship vanished from their scanners. Cloaking device, he explained, grinning. They won't find us now. For the first time, Zyara relaxed, but her relief was short-lived. They'll never stop hunting me, she said softly. You should leave me at the next station. Save yourself. Jack shook his head. Not happening. He glanced at her. Why are they after you? Who the hell are you? For a moment, Zyara was silent. Then she took a deep breath. I'm not just some fugitive, she said. I'm Princess Zyara of the Velnari Empire. Jack stared at her. You're royalty. Not that it matters, she said bitterly. Not anymore. What did you do to piss them off this badly? Zyara's eyes darkened. I found out the truth. The Emperor, my father, is building a weapon. A planet killer. If he finishes it, no one in the galaxy will be safe. I tried to stop him. Now, I'm the most wanted woman alive. Jack whistled low. So you're telling me we got the entire Velnari Empire on our tail? Yes. He rubbed his face. Great. The ship jolted suddenly, alarms blaring. Jack checked the scanners. They found us. Zyara's eyes widened. That's impossible. We're cloaked. Not anymore. Jack gritted his teeth. They must have tagged us before we jumped. The chase was back on. The bounty hunters' ships closed fast, their weapons lighting up the void. Jack pulled every maneuver he knew, but the freighter wasn't built for speed. Hang on, he shouted, diving into an asteroid field. The ship twisted and rolled, debris scraping against the hull. Enemy fire tore through the rocks, explosions filling their path. Jack pushed the engines harder, weaving through the chaos. Zyara clung to her seat, her knuckles white. We're not going to make it. Yes, we will. Jack spotted a massive asteroid ahead, a cavernous opening just big enough for their ship. Trust me. The freighter shot into the cave, scraping against the walls. The pursuing ships tried to follow, only to smash into the asteroid in fiery bursts. Inside, darkness swallowed them. Jack brought the ship to a halt, the silence almost deafening. We wait here, he said, breathing hard. They'll think we're dead. Ziara looked at him, her eyes wide. You saved me. Yeah, well, Jack muttered, suddenly uncomfortable. You're not so bad for a princess. For the first time, she smiled. But their respite wouldn't last. The Velnari Empire wouldn't stop until they were both dead. And Jack Carter wasn't the kind of man to run forever. It was time to fight back. Jack Carter adjusted the controls of their battered freighter, the engines still sputtering from their wild escape through the asteroid field. Ziara sat quietly beside him, her golden eyes fixed on the darkness outside. The tension in the cabin was thick. Both of them knew they couldn't run forever. Then the comm crackled to life. Jack, it's me. Jack's heart leaped at the familiar voice. Reese? He said, barely believing it. Reese Voss was an old war buddy, one of the few people Jack still trusted. You're a long way from home, man. Could say the same for you, Reese replied. Word's out, Jack. You've got half the galaxy hunting you. But listen, I can help. There's an old station in the Virex belt. It's off-grid, safe. I can meet you there. Jack glanced at Ziara. She nodded slowly. We don't have a choice, she said softly. All right, Reese, Jack said. We're on our way. The Virex belt was a graveyard of twisted metal and forgotten ships, the remnants of battles long past. The abandoned space station loomed ahead. A skeletal structure barely held together, its flickering lights casting eerie shadows. Jack set the freighter down on a rusting landing pad. Stay close, he told Ziara as they stepped into the dimly lit corridors. The air smelled of rust and decay. The silence was oppressive. They reached the meeting point, a large open hangar. Reese was already there, flanked by a few rough-looking mercs. Jack felt a twinge of unease. Jack, Reese grinned, arms wide. Good to see you, brother. Jack didn't lower his guard. Wish I could say the same. What's with the backup? Just a precaution, Reese said smoothly. You're carrying some high-value cargo. His eyes flicked to Ziara. The Velnari princess herself. Didn't think you had it in you, Jack. Jack's blood went cold. Reese, don't do this. But Reese's smile turned hard. Sorry, Jack. A bounty like this changes everything. Before Jack could react, the hangar doors slammed shut, and mercenaries poured in, weapons raised. Get down, Jack shouted, pushing Ziara behind cover as blaster fire erupted. Jack's rifle snapped up, and his military instincts kicked in. He moved with deadly precision, taking down enemies with short, controlled bursts. But they were outnumbered and heavily outgunned. Ziara wasn't just a bystander. She moved like lightning, her alien martial arts a blur of strikes and counters. A merc lunged at her, and she twisted, driving a knee into his gut before slamming an elbow into his head. He dropped like a stone. Nice moves, Jack called, dropping another enemy. But the fight was far from over. A sniper's shot clipped Jack's shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Pain flared through him. But he gritted his teeth and kept firing. Jack, Ziara's voice was filled with fear and rage. That's when it happened. Ziara's golden eyes began to glow, and the air around her shimmered with heat and energy. The mercs hesitated, and that was their mistake. With a cry, Ziara unleashed her power. Bolts of pure energy lashed out from her hands, striking the mercenaries with devastating force. The hangar filled with light and heat, and when it faded, the remaining enemies lay motionless. Jack struggled to his feet, his shoulder burning. Remind me not to make you angry, he muttered. Ziara rushed to his side. You're hurt. I'll live, Jack said, wincing. But we won't if we stay here. Reese's people won't stop coming. As if to prove his point, the station's alarms began to blare. They know we're here, Ziara said. We have to go. But their ship was damaged, and the enemy was closing in. Jack tightened his grip on his rifle. Then we fight. The flickering lights of the ship's medbay cast long shadows across the room. Jack Carter sat on the cold metal table, his face tight with pain as Zyara carefully wrapped his wounded shoulder. Her touch was gentle, but her hands trembled. "You didn't have to take that hit for me," she whispered, her golden eyes focused on the bandages. Jack forced a smile. "Could have fooled me. Seemed like a good idea at the time." But Zyara didn't laugh. Instead, she finally looked up at him, and what he saw in her eyes stopped him cold. Fear, guilt, and something deeper. "Why did you help me, Jack?" she asked softly. "You didn't know who I was. You still don't know how much danger I bring." Jack shrugged with his good shoulder. "You were hurt. Scared. That was enough." Her hands stilled. "No one's ever done that for me before." For a moment, the tension in the room shifted, turning softer, more vulnerable. Jack saw the cracks in Zyara's tough exterior, and it made his chest tighten in a way he wasn't ready for. "Why are they after you, Zyara?" he asked, his voice gentle. "What's so dangerous about you?" Zyara sighed, sitting down beside him. "It's not me. It's what I know." She hesitated, then the words spilled out. "My father, the Emperor, rules through fear and lies. His alliance with the AI supremacy is built on a secret, one that could destroy his empire if the truth got out. I found that truth, and now they want me dead before I can reveal it." Jack stared at her. "You're telling me you're a princess?" "Technically," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "But that doesn't matter. What matters is the dreadnought chasing us. It's not just any ship. It's AI-controlled, faster and stronger than anything we have. It won't stop until we're dead." Jack ran a hand through his hair. "Great, so we've got a homicidal empire and a rogue AI after us. Perfect." Silence fell between them, heavy and tense. Then Zyara spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jack, have you ever lost everything?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was rough. "My battalion. We fought the AI supremacy on Eridani IV. We held the line while the civilians evacuated. They never made it out. None of them did." Her hand found his, warm and steady. "I'm sorry." Jack looked at her, really looked at her. "Me too." The quiet stretched on, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt right. Then the ship's alarm blared. The dreadnought had found them. Jack jumped to his feet, pain forgotten. "We need a plan." Zyara's eyes hardened. "We reveal the truth, or we die trying." Jack grinned, despite the odds. "Guess it's all or nothing." "Guess so," she whispered. And this time, when their eyes met, the fear was gone, replaced by something fierce and unbreakable. They were in this together. The atmosphere of the broadcasting station crackled with tension. The lights flickered as the station shook from the distant impact of orbital bombardments. Every second counted, and Jack Carter knew it. He moved swiftly through the darkened corridors, his side burning with pain from his earlier injury, but he pushed it aside. They had come too far to stop now. Beside him, Zyara moved like a shadow, silent and deadly. But there was a new weight in her eyes, determination mixed with fear. She knew what was coming. They both did. "Once we get to the main control room, you'll only have a few minutes to send the data," Jack said, keeping his voice low as they crept forward. "After that, every ship in the Empire will know where we are." Zyara nodded. "We don't need long, just enough to tell the galaxy the truth." They reached the heavy blast doors leading to the control room. Jack tapped a few buttons on the console, but the doors didn't budge. His heart sank. "It's locked down," he muttered. "We'll have to." Before he could finish, the station trembled violently, and the doors suddenly hissed open. Jack froze. That's not good. The room beyond was vast, filled with flickering screens and consoles, but it wasn't empty. Standing in the center, waiting for them, was a nightmare made of steel and flesh. The Emperor's most dangerous enforcer. a towering cyborg with glowing red eyes and armor plating fused with his own body. "I was hoping you'd come," the cyborg said, his voice a distorted growl. "The Emperor sends his regards." Jack barely had time to move before the cyborg charged. The first strike was like a freight train. Jack dove aside, but the shockwave from the impact sent him skidding across the floor. He gritted his teeth, rolling to his feet just as Ziara unleashed a blast of energy from her hands. The cyborg raised an arm, absorbing the attack with a shimmering shield. "You'll have to do better than that," it sneered. Jack didn't wait. He fired his blaster, aiming for the joints and exposed wiring. Anything that wasn't covered in armor. The shot sparked against the cyborg's body, but they barely slowed it down. "Jack!" Ziara shouted. "The console. I need time." He nodded, heart pounding. "Go. I'll buy you some." Ziara ran, diving toward the main terminal. The cyborg moved to intercept, but Jack was faster. He tackled the monster's leg, throwing all his strength into the hit. It was like hitting a wall, but it was enough to knock the cyborg off balance. "You picked the wrong human," Jack growled. The fight was brutal. The cyborg was faster and stronger, but Jack had experience, and he had grit. He dodged and struck, using every ounce of his training. He knew he couldn't win in a straight fight, but he didn't have to. He just had to hold on. Behind him, Ziara's fingers flew over the controls. The station rocked again as the bombardment grew closer. "Almost there," she called out. But the cyborg was done playing. It swung a massive arm, catching Jack in the side and sending him crashing into the wall. Pain exploded through his body, but he forced himself up, blood dripping from his mouth. "Stay down, human," the cyborg hissed. "You've already lost." Jack wiped the blood from his face. "Not yet." The cyborg raised its arm for the killing blow, and then Ziara screamed. The room filled with blinding light as her power erupted. The air vibrated with energy, and the cyborg staggered back, its shield flickering under the assault. "You will not touch him." Ziara's voice was fierce and commanding, her eyes glowing with pure power. The ground itself seemed to quake beneath her. Jack saw his chance. He pushed through the pain, drawing his last explosive charge from his belt. With a roar, he hurled it at the cyborg, and Ziara's energy blast ignited it midair. The explosion was deafening. The cyborg was engulfed in fire and light, its scream of rage cut short as it was torn apart. Silence fell. Jack slumped to his knees, his vision swimming. Ziara was at his side in an instant, her hands on his face. "You did it," he whispered. But her eyes were filled with tears. "You're hurt. Jack, stay with me. Please." The station rocked violently. The bombardment was getting closer. "The message," Jack started. "It's sent," she whispered. "The truth is out." He smiled. "Good. That's good." Darkness took him before he could say more. The message had been sent. The truth, the secrets hidden by the Empire, were now exposed to the entire galaxy. Jack Carter had done his part. His final part. The once untouchable Emperor's reign began to crumble under the weight of the truth that Jack and Ziara had fought so hard to reveal. But the price for this victory was high, and Jack's life hung by a thread. Ziara stood over him, her heart breaking as she watched the man who had given everything, even his life, for the cause. The broadcasting station they had used to send the message had been their last hope, their last stand. It was now in ruins, and the galaxy would never be the same. But Jack was fading. His injuries, combined with the exhaustion from the fight, were too much for his body to handle. He had given his all, and Ziara wasn't ready to lose him. She held his hand, her tears falling onto his battered face, mixing with the dirt and blood. "Jack, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You can't leave me. Not like this. Not after everything we've been through." Jack's eyes fluttered open, his gaze weak but still filled with the warmth she had come to cherish. He gave her a soft smile, even in his pain, and squeezed her hand. "You taught me how to fight, Ziara. Not just for survival, but for something worth fighting for," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I never thought I'd find someone like you." She leaned down, brushing his hair from his forehead, her hands trembling. "You're the strongest person I know, Jack. You're a human. You're one of a kind. And I couldn't have done this without you." Jack's smile faded, and his breath became shallower. But his eyes never left hers. "You'll be okay," he said. "You've got the strength to lead them, Ziara, to lead the galaxy to a better place." She nodded, though tears blurred her vision. "But I'll always need you by my side, Jack. I can't do this alone. Not without you." Jack chuckled softly, though it was a pain sound. "You're stronger than you think. You'll lead them all to freedom, because of who you are." With those words, Jack's eyes closed for the final time. His hand slipped from hers, and Ziara let out a guttural scream that echoed through the ruins of the station. She held him close, unwilling to let go, but knowing deep down that her love for him, and his sacrifice, would never be forgotten. Weeks passed. The galaxy changed. Ziara, once an assassin running from the very empire she had been born into, now stood at the head of a revolution. The message Jack had risked everything for had sparked a fire of rebellion that spread like wildfire across the stars. The empire, once a shadow over every system, was beginning to crack. The truth about their corrupt rule was now out in the open, and the people were rising up. Ziara had become a symbol, a leader, a beacon of hope for those who had once lived in fear. Her pain over Jack's death had not diminished, but it had been tempered by the knowledge that his sacrifice had changed everything. The galaxy would never be the same, and Jack had been the one to set it on the path to freedom. But with that victory came an emptiness that Ziara couldn't ignore. Every moment she led the rebellion, every speech she gave, every battle they fought, Jack's memory was there, a shadow that never quite left her. She had been a fighter her entire life, but Jack had taught her to fight for something bigger than herself. She would sit alone sometimes, staring out at the stars, thinking about the man she had lost. She had promised him that they would meet again, somewhere, someday. And she clung to that promise. She had to. The thought of living without him was unbearable, but she knew she couldn't let his death be in vain. She stood on the bridge of one of their starships, watching as the fleet prepared to jump into another battle. The war was far from over, but the tides had turned. The Empire was on the defensive now, their grip weakening with every passing day. A voice came through the comms, snapping her out of her thoughts. "Leader Ziara, we're ready to move out." She straightened, wiping the tears from her eyes. She could not afford to be weak now. The galaxy needed her, needed the hope that Jack had given his life for. She had to keep going for him, for everyone who had suffered under the Empire's rule. "I'll be there shortly," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. She left the bridge and made her way to the command center, where her advisors awaited. They were all counting on her to lead them to victory, and she would not fail them. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. Ziara's eyes scanned the crew as she entered the room, taking in the determined faces of those who had fought beside her. They were no longer just rebels. They were a united force, one that could challenge the Empire. The galaxy was awakening, and Ziara would be the one to lead them to freedom. As she stood before them, she felt a presence, not in the room, but within herself, a strength that Jack had instilled in her, even in his final moments. He had believed in her, and that belief had carried her through every battle, every struggle. She was not alone. "Let's end this," Ziara said, her voice unwavering. "For Jack, for everyone who has suffered, we'll make sure his sacrifice was not in vain." The room erupted in applause, the crew rallying behind their leader. Ziara smiled, though her heart ached with the memory of Jack. She would fight for him. She would fight for the galaxy. And somewhere, In the vastness of the stars, she knew that Jack was watching over her, not with his body, but with the strength of his love, his sacrifice, and his belief in her. As the fleet prepared to move out, Zara stood tall, her eyes fixed on the stars. She would not stop. She would keep fighting, no matter what it took, because the galaxy was now hers to save. And she would do it in Jack's honor. The promise they had made to each other, the promise that one day, somewhere, they would meet again, was a promise she would carry with her until the end of her days. For Jack, for the future, for the galaxy.